You are now listening to the I Think I Love My Wife podcast. And this is your best friend's best friend, Chidozie Okafor, ready to take you on another journey. Are you with me? Because I'm ready. Let's get it. This episode is sponsored by Nello Effect, a coaching and consulting service that helps people turn mindfulness into action as they navigate the dating world as well as their relationships. Follow on Instagram at Nello.effect to find more information in the episode description. Today we discuss the importance of self-awareness, talk about how vulnerability looks different on different people, and learn what it was like marrying into a different culture. I'm back with Jourdan. I hope you guys enjoyed last week's episode. Back to continue the conversation. I promise we're going to keep the story more on him and his experiences, learn more about his wife and their relationship. And so I didn't even get through the contextual questions because we went down a rabbit hole, but it was a good rabbit hole. And so I'm gonna try again and let's see if we can stay on topic. How long did you guys date before you proposed?
That is a good question. I proposed 4 years, essentially, a little shy of 4 years after we first met.
So you guys dated for 4 years?
I mean, yeah. I mean, that's kind of the easiest way to describe it. I think I'm a big believer that grad school is not real life, and so you need to live in the world with people and experience everyday life before you know that this is a person that you could spend your life with. Because look, grad school is a fantasy world, right? We're unemployed, we're traveling all around the world,
we're just living a good life.
I think we both needed to know that this relationship could sustain, the
real world. I get it. So for context, you guys were together for 2 years while in school, and then pretty much the 2 years post school before you proposed.
Yes, correct. So we met obviously in school and then dated, and then in San Francisco we moved to San Francisco together. Well, separately but together. And she lived in Oakland. I lived in San Francisco. She eventually moved into the city. I was also living in a different place in the city. And it worked out well. I think we got to know each other. Again, my wife is very professionally motivated, as am I, and so wanted her to have the chance to develop her career and her identity as a professional outside of the confines of my relationship. Again, I think one of the strengths of our relationship is our ability to have separate lives. And so, wanted to give her the chance to do that. I also wanted the chance to do it coming out of my graduate school experience. And so it worked out great for us.
Was that part of the decision not to live with each other when you guys moved to? Because imagine you together, you go to one of the most expensive cities, and we're gonna do it separate.
Yeah, again, it's nice to have a wife who has strong opinions. I think my wife, we come from very different cultural backgrounds, and for her, it was really important that you be married in order to live with a boy, as she would say. And so she was very transparent even before we thought about moving to San Francisco, that if we did move somewhere, we were not going to be living together because that just wasn't her thing. As a very logical financial person, I was just like, what? That was a hard pill to swallow. But I think at the end, it was still good for us, right? I think, again, the real world is the real world. You got to be able to navigate paying bills and living life and having those experiences. Even though we lived apart, I think it was pretty clear to us after 6 or so months living there that I think this is going to work, right? This is not just us continuing to figure it out. So even though we weren't living together and she was living with a roommate, we started, aligning elements of our life as people who were going to be together for a longer period of time. And so eventually we did move in together after we got married via an Arab ceremony, Muslim ceremony specifically. But that was important to her, and so it was important to me, right? I care deeply about my wife's family and want to respect her and respect their traditions, which are very different than my own. And we figured it out, right? Again, it took a lot of communication.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because, I'm a logical, not to say people are illogical, but in that scenario, I probably would have been thinking more along the lines, financially, this doesn't make the
This
most
makes
sense.
zero sense.
So
Yeah.
so a little bit, how did you, I'm sure it was conversations, but how, it's easy on the back end, like, I understood where she was coming from. I respected it. But, in the moment, I'm sure you felt strongly about the way you felt. How did you navigate your own personal feelings and logic with her personal feelings?
Yeah. Um, Honestly, it was just a lot of conversations. Like we talked about this like all the time, right? Even though I knew the situation going in, we talked about it before we moved. I helped her find a roommate. Her first roommate in Oakland was a business school friend of ours. And so I connected them so that they could live together to facilitate that. When their lease ended, I was just like, "What are we doing?" And again, to her credit, she stuck to her guns. It was really important to her. And I think, look, the thing about both of us that I think is important is that there are a few things that really matter to us both deeply. And it's almost like, you say to the other person, like, "Look, this is a line," and then like they respect it. Now, didn't stop us from talking about it, right?
Yeah.
Because I had student loans, and rings are expensive, and so I'm just like, "Yo, we might get there faster if we just."
You want this ring, right? No, I think it's important though. I think it's important that you
Yeah.
said that. Like, you knew kind of what the situation was to a degree.
Yep.
I'm sure if it was two conversations and she gave in, you wouldn't have been mad at that. But
Yep.
I think the fact that you guys could have the conversation and continue to discuss it is a testament to like what actually happens in a relationship. Because I think we lose track of, like, both of us been consultants, and like change is hard for anybody.
Yep.
And someone, especially
Absolutely.
when you're over the age of 30, to do something that like you just, I don't know the best word for it, but like from a core person of who you are, just like doesn't mesh with it. It's
Yep.
hard for you to change, right? And so the
Yeah.
fact that like you guys could have the conversation, it was more so probably to help you get to the point where you're like,
Process.
okay, it is what it is, and process it. This is the best word.
Yep.
Process it. Someone has to be patient to continue to ride that ride with you. And
Yep.
oftentimes, like, folks aren't. Like, we talked about this 3 times. How many times are we going to talk about this thing? And
Yeah.
so,
And I think at a certain level, it's also about empathy for your partner, right? What I love about my wife is that we're both objective, right? We're objective for the other person, right? So actually, our core personalities are such that we often put other people's needs and wants ahead of our own. And the nice part about our relationship is I think we have 100% trust in each other to do that for each other. So like on one hand, I was being persistent because I was just like, "Yo, this doesn't make sense," and I was pushing her, which is I think appropriate for your partner at times. And at the same time, she was patient because she was like, "This dude gonna keep asking me about this."
yeah.
Told him where I stand, and I think it like it takes those conversations for you to get to a happy place in a relationship, even if both people are not happy with the outcome, right? Happy place doesn't always mean everybody got exactly what they want, but it means that they're satisfied with the outcome. And so I think we talked about it a lot. We went back and forth. I'm a big numbers guy, so we looked at the numbers a bunch of times, right? She looked at her numbers and was like, "This is crazy," but like it was the right thing to do. And I think, again, sticking to her guns made me respect her even more because she's very principled, and I appreciate that. But I also think it solidified for me that I wouldn't be able to bully her, right? And I think, look, personalities are what they are. I would not count myself in any capacity as a bully, but I'm a very rational, methodical person, and so some people can get worn down by that, right? And thankfully, she does not. And if anything, she gives it as good as she gets it, right?
No,
So
I mean, I think people talk about this Kevin Samuels thing, like high value man all the time, and it gets like real crazy. But I do think, I'm going to use the term, don't go crazy, folks. They're listening. But I think when you do see like a guy that's high value, that like knows what he brings to the table, is of substance. In my conversations with people, especially like women that are trying to figure stuff out, I think they see something that they like really like, and like because they recognize that value, they're like, well, I can wiggle, I can move on some of these really important boundaries for myself. When like I think in contrast, I think those same how you value guys, yourself and myself included, actually respect that. Because like we're used to like I won't
Yeah,
say weak people, but we're used to people saying they're about something and then you put a little
they don't show up.
pressure and they don't show up or they give in. And
Yep.
so I think it's interesting to me that sometimes people see that as like, well, I want to appease them in a way when it's really important to them, and then we almost look at that like, well, that's not as attractive as the person that said, "This is what I'm about." You got to be reasonable with you and pick and choose the things that you are drawing your line in the sand for. But the people that do that, I think a lot of men tend to find that to be attractive. And you said it. None of them want someone that they can walk over because we're used to figuring out ways to achieve what we want, whether that's multiple conversations, whether that's out thinking, out maneuvering. And so the fact that you see someone that can hold their own and it's not going to be just me. I think, and
Yep.
you said like I respected that. I think women don't realize how much that like guys do that. They gotta all the intangibles have to be there for that, but I think it's not talked about enough how much like guys really respect someone that can hold their own and are gonna push back in some ways, respectfully, but push back and be a challenge in some of those ways. And again, the journey in the moment may not feel great, but at the end of it, you're like, I respect this person as a partner because I know like I'll say this as like high value. Well, high value is not the right word. As someone that's very perceptive of themselves, right? You're headstrong because you recognize what you know.
Yep.
you know, but you're also, I would say, um,
But but I think
you,
being headstrong and being open to
but
new ideas is not in conflict, right? I think
no, no,
a lot of times people.
exactly.
Yeah,
What I was going to add to that is that you also recognize where you don't know, and so you're
yep,
willing to like get that input because you're like, hey, there's a lot of things I don't know too, and so you don't want to be in a situation where it's always what I want because you recognize I don't know everything, and so I need someone that's
exactly.
going to add and fill in places that I don't know.
And I think part of that is also culture, right? My wife and I talk about this frequently because we come from two different religions, two different cultures, and I think if you love a person, you have to understand the role that culture plays in the development of that person, right?
Hmm.
So it's hard for me to say, hey, I love everything about you, but I don't like that you won't move in with me, right?
Yeah.
Right? That she has strong opinions, that she's headstrong, that she believes what she believes adamantly and is not willing to compromise herself are all things I think that in part come from her culture. And so you can't just take the good parts of that and leave the bad parts. You have to take them both, right?
Yeah, you got to take the quicker with the straights. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think that's one of many ways I would say that our cultural differences play a role, because I think even though we come from different religions and different parts of the world, I think our core values are the same, right? And those core values dictate how we move in the world, how we operate together as a unit, and how we handle even our conflict. Because again, every relationship has some conflict, right?
Yeah, and I'm gonna get through at least the contextual stuff, and then I want to go back to this.
Yeah.
So how long have you guys been married now? Like,
November will be 3 years, so just shy of 3 years.
okay, and what do you do for a living? You can broadly. I didn't tell you. I didn't prep you, but just broadly speaking, you
Yeah,
don't gotta give us
I
the
work
company.
for I work for a technology company, and I lead their go-to-market strategy and operations
You got it.
for the Americas.
You also entrepreneur.
I am also an entrepreneur and an investor. I invest in predominantly in Black and vulnerable entrepreneurs, so folks with disabilities, women, people of color, people, veterans, people who have challenges identifying funding in the existing infrastructure.
And what does your wife do? You can say like broadly.
My wife runs D&I strategic partnerships for a video game company.
Cool, cool. And so I think you mentioned like culture, religion, all those things impact kind of your perspective and how you grow up. I also think how we were raised, like the parental status also impacts that. And so, what would you
Yeah.
say, like you growing up, were both your parents around? How was that dynamic for you?
Yeah, I grew up predominantly in a single parent household. My mom raised me most of the time. My dad was not completely absent, but he was absent at various points. My wife grew up in a two-parent household. And another binding factor for my wife and I is we both lost our dads. So that's something else that we have in common.
Good. And then, do you guys have any children?
We do not have any children right now.
Is that something that y'all want or y'all talking about?
It is a frequent topic of conversation with our families. I
But
think
not with y'all.
uh, no, I mean it is with us. I think the challenge for us is literally at our wedding, people were asking us when we were gonna have babies, and so I think we kind of, again, you know us, but we bucked at that and kind of put up a pretty forceful wall, saying like maybe we're not gonna have kids, like maybe we can't, who knows what's possible. So I think we are trying to enjoy our life as a married couple, and I think we love kids, we enjoy kids. I don't know that we've made a decision fully yet if we want them for ourselves.
Got it. Got it.
Some days we do, some days we don't. But it's a, a frequent discussion.
It's fluid.
Fluid discussion is the right way to put it.
Got it.
And
So let's
frequent.
get back. Let's get back into the culture piece because I think it's a unique dynamic. I think you might be the first person, not necessarily interracial, but at least from a cultural standpoint and a religious standpoint that I've had. So I want to make sure I spend some time on it because I think sometimes people are like, "No, I can't do it from jump."
Yeah,
And my mom told me that, and you've echoed this a little bit, that marriage is hard. Like it's not. There's no if ands
yeah,
buts about it. It takes work. It's hard. And she said, when you choose to enter a relationship, especially one like marriage, with someone that has like core differences, right, in culture or religion or what have you, you could take something that's hard and make it harder because when you guys have those similarities, you guys already have some alignment on certain things from jump. And so, was that something you thought about when you? I mean, you knew I think pretty early on about the ethnicity piece and like the religious piece. One, can you share with us, where you stand and where your wife stands? But then also, when you met, like, was that a thought of yours, and how did it factor in?
yeah. I wouldn't normally challenge a Nigerian mama, but I do have to challenge the assumption. I think, look, all religions are built on the same core values, right? And how those religions display those values could be different, right? The food you eat, the way you dress, the way you engage other people, there are some for sure differences. But I would argue at the core, good people are good people. Religion, culture, none of those things necessarily matter, right? Like good people are good people.
Hmm.
When I met my wife, I was agnostic, if you will, and she was raised Muslim. We are now both Muslim.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I converted, yeah, I converted before we got married. I think,
Can I stop you real quick?
yes.
Was that something that you felt you needed to do, or was important for you guys to get there? Like you kind of
Uh,
like being around it, you were learning and you kind of got into it, or you felt like that was a necessity to take it to the next level.
I'm not sure that it was definitively a necessity. It was something that was important to us both at a certain level. Also, something important to my wife's family. I don't know that I felt forced to do it. I think when you, again, like, I think at the core, again, practices aside, religions tend to have the same values. And so I didn't feel necessarily value misalignment. I would also say that the depth and practice of religion, depending on what part of the Muslim world
Yeah,
you come from, is very different.
yeah.
And so I could get behind very meaningfully the way that my wife and her family approach the religion, the way they practice. And again, the core values I value as a human, even as a non Muslim human, are applicable to how her family practices. And so for me, there was comfort in that, but I definitely didn't feel forced to or felt like it was an obligation. I think, again, when you show up for your partner, you show up for them fully, right? And so for me, it was not a big deal. Um, I would say we did talk about it extensively because I think My wife was very uncomfortable with me with there ever being a perception that I felt like I had to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think talking about culture, my wife is the first person in her immediate family in any direction to ever date someone who's actually not even from the town that they grew up in. So if you think about the difference
Yeah.
between dating someone who all come from like not just the same country, same
It's
city,
like,
same
yeah, it's like, oh, we can make an exception because, like, you're in a bordering town or you're in the
it,
same city. It's like,
yeah,
bro, you chose all
I might
the
as well be
biggest.
from Mars as a
Yeah.
black dude from Brooklyn, marrying a Lebanese woman. So I think my wife did not want me to ever have to feel like I was being pressured into anything. Again, she is very transparent, right? She would have said otherwise, but again, as someone who cares deeply about my feelings, she was more concerned about if I was going to be okay with it and if that was all right.
Do you think it was easier? I understand the value piece, right? But do you think it was easier for you to make that transition, being in a place of like not attached to anything, versus if you were, let's say, Jewish or if you were Christian and anchored in that?
Uh, no, yeah, I think this is more of a testament to my personality. I think organized religions of all kinds can be misused, right? We've seen many, many examples of
Yeah.
that recently and since the beginning of religion. And so I don't know that me being sort of agnostic to start was necessarily a pro or con per se. I grew up going to church, so I just didn't necessarily. I don't draw. I didn't draw at that time a specific distinction between being Baptist or Methodist or Catholic, whatever, right? And so for me, I don't think that my lack of other option, if you will, played a huge role in my decision making. Um, I see some of the same look. Not to upset anyone, but
No, it's okay if people get triggered.
yeah,
It's okay.
as
We
someone who's
don't mind
actually
triggering people.
read, yeah, well, trigger warning for those folks. As someone who's read many of these books, the stories are overwhelmingly similar, right? As are the principles, generally speaking. And so for us, we felt that it was, not a big shift, right? The things that my wife cares about culturally are similar to things that I care about culturally, regardless of the fact that she grew up in a different religion, right? And ironically, um, yeah, and maybe shout out to all those people who question being in an interfaith marriage, right? Again, ignoring the practice for just a moment, right? The goals and intent are the same, right? They want righteous people to live in a peaceful world where they support other humans, regardless of their race, gender, sexual orientation, et cetera, right? And so if you can get behind that, then I can get behind it.
Got it. So that's helpful because I think a lot of people struggle with that, and they probably have met great people that that because of those considerations, they just say, hey, you know what, I can't even like look at this as like a realistic option. And so I think it's always good to hear those stories when
Yeah,
to have examples of how people have made that work because it looks different in different cases. And again,
yeah,
your story is your story, but doesn't mean it's gonna work for someone else. But I think it's always good to see examples of options that you might have not thought could be options.
yeah. And I think the other call out here is like, look, I've been to the masjid and we've been to church, right, since we've dated, right, because you know, different life events call for us to make those distinctions, right. You need to have a partner who is flexible at a certain level, and even if um, you know, when we pray at my mom's house, my wife says Amin and not Amen, right? Does it make a
Mm-hmm.
meaningful difference? No,
Yeah,
right?
God heard you.
Exactly, and I think that's the part that to me gets lost, right? People so worried about these labels, they're trading the label for the intent, right?
Yeah. No, that's real. So tell me, man, what do you love? You talked about your wife a lot, a little bit. What do you love about your wife?
I just love who she is as a person. She's brutally honest. She's a straight shooter. She's very caring and loving. I think she is a better human than I am, and
That's always a win.
I appreciate that about her. She is giving and caring. Um, I think. in a way that I think more people should be. And so I appreciate those elements of her. She's stubborn, and has her way about her. But those are all things that I love. She has high expectations for the people she loves, both herself and everyone she's around. And I appreciate someone who's going to challenge me and push me to be the best version of me that I can be, right? Um, my businesses, my investments, honestly, my wife put the confidence in me to make those steps and do those things because she has faith in who I am and what, what gifts I may have to bring to the world. So I just appreciate her for all of those things.
How important is that to you? Because I've heard different guys say that, like, and these are people that are pretty confident, but everybody has like insecurities or doubts, especially when it comes to like taking certain chances and things
Yeah,
like that. And I've heard a lot of guys say, like, my wife was the one. They knew how bad I wanted this, or they knew I was
yep.
good at this, and they kind of lit the fire, under me to go do it. How
Yeah.
important was that for you? And how did that
For
make you
me, that's
feel?
yeah. For me, it's huge, right? I don't, we talk about this often. I don't want a cheerleader. I want a partner, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think lots of people have cheerleaders, and that's great, right? And cheerleaders serve a purpose. Don't get me wrong, right? This is not a critique of cheerleaders, but for me, it's important to have a partner who's gonna push you and motivate you. So, like, when I'm being mad extra and I'm gunning hard for something, she's like, "Yo, you need to chill," right? Or when I'm not pushing as hard as she thinks I should be, she's like, "Yo, what are you doing? You need to step it up." So, like, I think she strikes a very meaningful balance that I think in the way that only a partner can, right? Because cheerleaders, to those, you've heard me say this before, right? There's two types of people in this world, in my opinion. People who love a thing so much they feel like they should never criticize it, right?
Yeah.
And then people who love a thing so much they will critique it until they think it can be, until it becomes the best it can be, right?
Hmm.
Um, and that critique can sometimes mean push harder. That critique can sometimes mean pull back. I think I put my wife squarely in that latter category, and for me, that's great, right? Because she's not going to let me, get away with my worst instincts, and again, good or bad, and she's going to do it in a way that's loving and puts my interests first, right? Even if I can't see them, right?
No, so I think that's cool that you said. I was having a conversation with a friend. He's been on the podcast, and we ran into some people that knew me and my ex, and he was talking
Mm-hmm.
about like the question was like, why did y'all break up? Why did y'all break up? And like to me, it's a hard thing to like verbalize, and because like technically that person didn't do anything wrong. Those are like the hardest
Yeah,
breakups. Like no one did anything wrong, but
just
um,
didn't work.
it just wasn't working for me. And there were a lot of not a lot. There were several, I guess, points of evidence that had me like feeling less confident about what we could become and what I needed.
Yeah.
And so he kept saying like, "You guys were incompatible," you know. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, "No, like we got along really well. I don't care to hang out and do nothing with a lot of people, but like there was definitely some balancing pieces that we had. But I think as you were talking, it made me realize like I'm definitely in the latter camp that you mentioned. Like how I grew up and what I appreciate, and because I'm, I think we all are like this. You and your wife, we're very much like critical of ourselves. That we appreciate stuff that we can't see because if we had knew it, we would have done it ourselves and fixed it or addressed it. So I'm very much in that latter camp of like the criticism I appreciate and I value, and like looking back, she was very much in the former part, like love on me, love on me, love on me. And there's not a right or wrong. There's philosophies that would say,
Yeah.
hey, forget your weaknesses, focus on your strengths, and build those up as best as you can. And so I'm not saying that there's one way to do it or not, but I never looked at that as a point of like big compatibility in terms of
Yeah.
what you need and what you may not be getting. to like drive you or to show up for you in the way you need to be. You want someone to show up for you. And so as you
Yep.
were talking about that, I was thinking about that. I was like, well, maybe he was right. Maybe that area is probably more important than I probably gave it credit. And that was definitely an area where we saw the world differently and showed up
Yep.
very differently because it also impacted her. Like, I'm sure your wife could I don't think criticize is not the best word. Could provide feedback for you in a critical manner, right?
Exactly.
And just say, hey,
Yep.
I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that, and you take it in stride. For me, doing that was hit her a lot differently than I was accustomed to it. And so I don't make it seem like I was perfect in the situation either, but like there was a lack of recognition of like one what my approach was doing to her potentially, and also
Yep.
what her approach wasn't doing for me. And I probably didn't think about how critical or important that was from a compatibility standpoint until you talking about how like you guys were so much aligned to it because it fuels so many different aspects of your life when you
Yep.
have that.
Yeah, I agree, and I think, look, you know, there are challenges to both approaches, right?
Yeah,
And again, this is why I keep echoing this point about like it depends on where you thrive and where you see, that you know what you need. But again, like until you assess what you need, right, you
yeah,
don't know what you should be looking for in a partner. I'm not saying you Chidozi
yeah.
specifically, but just
Generally,
like
yeah.
you as in person. Yeah.
As you were talking, it was just a little bit more insightful based off a conversation that I
Yeah.
had earlier. Was there a moment when you? So the podcast is called "I Think I Love My Wife," and it tends to be triggering sometimes for people because they're like, "Well, you think you loves her? You're not sure."
Yeah.
But it's more so from like I think a lot of guys tend to have feelings that they don't necessarily fight, but they're maybe not aligned with as much as they or buy in as much in the beginning, even though they have these feelings, and there gets to a point where they're like, something happens or a set of experiences occur, and they're like, you know what, I think I love this person. But not that the
Yeah.
feeling is new, it's just like, no, what they're telling themselves is aligning now to how they've been feeling, and so it's an affirmation of what they've been feeling. And so, when was your point? Did you have a moment or a set of experiences where you were like, you know what, I think I love this woman?
Yeah. For me, it's you travel a lot in business school, right? And I think you travel a lot and you have all these experiences, right? And I think for me, uh, I've traveled a ton. I love traveling, right? But I think for me, the realization came, our second year probably, when we were traveling, and I was less interested in where we were going and what we were doing than like wondering what she was doing, if that makes
Yeah.
sense, right? And here's this thing that I've loved my entire life. Like I could to this day, I could tell you about the first time I ever flew on a plane, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And what that experience felt like, and like, even with COVID, like the excitement that I used to feel when I was traveling to a new place or going to do something new. I am very much an extrovert, and so I get my energy from people, and not everyone, but people I care for deeply. I get my energy from them. So COVID has been difficult for me being at home because like I get my energy from people, right? But I distinctly remember we were traveling, and yeah, we got where we were going, and we were, ready to turn up. And I was just like, I'm over this. I wonder what my wife is doing, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in that
This is your
moment, I
girlfriend at the
realized,
time, right?
well, my girlfriend at the time, yes. Um, in that moment, there was like an acute realization that I was willing to trade. Like I couldn't see these experiences I was having anymore, um, being more valuable than the experiences we would have together. Now, I
Yeah.
say that, but again, I still say I'm a rational, logical person, right?
Mm-hmm.
I needed to see what she was going to be like in the real world, right? And I have no shortage of examples of things that she has done since then, more actively, that have made me say like, I love this woman, and even when she gets on my nerves, right? There's only two women in my entire life who I ever feel more guilty about fighting with than whatever I'm angry about, right?
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother, who I was extremely close to, and my wife, right? When
Yeah.
I am angry with her, I am angry with myself for being angry with her. And that sounds crazy because it kind of is. But I think, like, the level of guilt that I feel is unmatched, and I only can equate that feeling with one other person in my life, and it's the one other person who I sort of love unconditionally, right? And so for me, that was a very real moment where I was like, to the ends of the earth, I'll follow this crazy woman, right?
No, I mean that's it's interesting you say that because I always tell people I forget where I heard it, but they say you like people because of and you love them despite of. And
Exactly.
so I think when you and I'm trying to step back from it, but like I would meet people and I'm like trying to find out not as quickly as possible, but like what are all the things that I don't like about you? Because I want to be at the point
Yeah.
where, despite those things, I still fuck with you.
Yeah.
And that might not be always the best approach because sometimes it can cloud the good things about them. And so I'm trying
Yep.
to find balance in that approach. But I also thought it was interesting that you said that you're an extrovert because anybody that at least they say knows us, but like seeing us in business school or us together juxtaposed together, be like Chidozie is an extrovert and Jourdan is an introvert, and they say it
Same
like
approach.
all the time. But it's like
Yep.
I can put on, but like it is, and I know like that's the way that like I get what I need to get, but I appreciate the downtime a lot,
Yep.
and I need that in a lot of ways. Whereas like I don't always in certain environments present that way because that's not gonna get me where I need to go to do what I need to do. And so it's funny you say that because I would see you sometimes in situations and be like, man, I need to chill out like Jourdan a little bit.
That's just an approach, you know.
Yeah, it's a different
I,
approach. I could be a hammer at certain times, and I think part of that's culturally. Like we weren't taught grace in terms of or finesse. It was like brute strength wins all the time, and so that tends to be your default when you're like operating. And I would see you in some ways, and I'm like, man, I see the finesse, and I need to like,
Thank
and
you.
how can I pick up some of those traits? And so it's interesting that you said that in that manner because I think people look at us differently in that regard. But the
Yeah.
other piece I was going to mention was I don't know if you had something to say.
No, no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Other piece I was going to say is that like it's interesting how like the people you really care about can drive you up the wall, right? And that tends to be
Yeah.
like an
It's because you
indicator.
care.
Yeah,
Yep.
and I was talking to funny. I was talking to someone last night. They FaceTime me randomly, and we were chatting. we were chatting, and they said to me, they're like people on these sites. And I think they're a Virgo. They talked about how like they like very much project their emotions. Da 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 da. And they're like, I feel like it's like you're Aries, you're a fire sign. I know people like you, and they're very much like that too. And I was like, I can be, but I've learned like I can't operate like that to get to be who I need to be in terms of achieve what I can't let my feelings. I feel greatly, but I don't
Yep.
really project often unless I've been drinking way too much. And
Yep.
so um and so I was telling her like part of why I do that because I have to control and like I'm also like nonchalant a bit in the beginning is because I have to control. For me, it's a control thing. I can't allow myself to like care deeply about someone without vetting them first because I don't know how they're gonna handle that.
That. Yeah.
Because I'm the type that like, yeah, we talked about earlier before we got on. We talked about all the things that we got going on, and like they're important to me, but like in the grand scheme of things, someone that I really care about versus like the podcast, sorry fans, or somebody else, like those are gonna be the first things to go versus this person's needs, and I tend to sacrifice those things very easily for people that I care about, and so it's hard for me to delineate once I've gone over that edge. So my best defense is my initial defense, and it's hard
Yep.
for people to understand that sometimes because I can be very much like nonchalant and like not I won't say emotionless, but like that degree of vulnerability where you're depending on people and all that, I don't really show a lot because I just know how that impacts me. And so it's interesting that you
Yeah.
say that in terms of like an emotional standpoint.
Well, but see, I think the challenge that I have with that, right? Again, this is not a commercial for go throw your heart out in the street, right? That's not it. But I do think at a certain level, right? Like this can't be so much about the other person, right? So I think we talk about grace, right? And I think for better or worse, right? Because in your 30s, you start to care less, right? You are who you are, right? And this idea that you're going to change unprompted defies your prior 30 years of life changes, right? So, you have not changed unsolicited in the past. So your decision to change now will not be unsolicited. It'll be because of some event or some experience in your life. And so where I would just challenge your thinking a little bit is that it's reactive to another human instead of what is in your best interest, right? So the reason why, I may come off as more chill is because like I'm actually only interested in having meaningful conversations. Like I know what my goal is to your earlier point, right? And because I know what my goal is, I am focused on that goal. And that goal is not about how another person will perceive me. That goal is about what I'm trying to accomplish, right? So I don't feel pressed about being, vulnerable because I feel like, well, I'm trying to draw a genuine connection with someone. In order to draw a genuine connection, I need to tell them something about myself that matters, right? Am I telling them my life story? Absolutely not. But I'm telling them something meaningful that would create the opportunity for a genuine connection. If I'm looking for a genuine connection but so reluctant to divulge of myself, like how do you get there, right?
No,
Right?
totally agree. Totally agree. And I don't know that my issue is the sharing part. I think a lot of people think that if you ask people, they think we friends, and I'm like, no, you're cool. And it's more of how I let people in versus what I give to them, right? And so like I agree that like I don't know that I have a problem with sharing at least what generally people think is like vulnerability or things about
Well, but
yourself.
that's
It's
but
about
you're hitting my point. You're hitting by saying what other people think are. You're completely validating the point that I make. It's not about what other people think and feel. It's about what you think and feel is
but
comfortable, right?
but
Because I think it's easy for people to create. It's easy for people to feel like they have a false perception of who you are as a person, right? Or maybe like a not false, but too close perception of who you are as a person. But I actually think it doesn't matter whether or not they have that perception if you don't care, if that makes sense.
I hear you, and I think in some ways you gotta like I was about to say you gotta play the game, but like we live in a society of like norms, right? And so
Exactly. Yep.
those are the when I say like what people think is vulnerability, like like you ask someone, this is probably a little superficial. But you ask someone like let's say they took the GMAT or the GRE, y'all are really cool. Like, hey, how'd you do? And they're like, I don't want to tell nobody what my score was. Da,
Hmm.
da, 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 da. Like because they don't. That's like where someone may see you say hey, what'd you do? You're like, oh, I got a 720. They're like, well, he was open, like he shared, right?
Yep.
To me, someone may look at that and say, well, he was being vulnerable. He like shared, or let's say you got a 520, you didn't do well. Like,
Yep.
oh, he's being vulnerable, right? He was open, and generally from a norm standpoint, that's considered like vulnerable. You know what I mean?
Yep. That makes sense.
But to
But,
me, sharing that is not that serious.
yep.
But I would share it if someone perceived that as vulnerability. But for me, that's not vulnerable for me being vulnerable. That is like a broad conception of vulnerability. Like my vulnerability I've learned is around like depending on people. Like
Yep.
we can talk about everything we talk about, right? And someone will perceive me as being vulnerable and they'll get what they need to like equate me to that and respond that way. But for me, there's probably a arm length distance away from them that I feel because like I don't trust them enough to be vulnerable in a way that matters to me. And
Yep.
that's where I struggle with.
Yep. Yeah. No, it makes sense. It makes sense, and I think that struggle is normal in sort of a dating world. I just question if it serves your well, I mean, obviously you know me, so I'll say I question
Keep
if it
it, we
serves
keep it
your
real.
purpose. Yeah, no, I was gonna say I question if it serves your purposes to get to know that many people, right? Like first and foremost, right? But then I also question the depth of what you choose to share, right? Based on the volume of interactions you're having, right? Does that make sense? Like so,
Are you saying this in a
like
general tense or in like a dating
yeah, I'm saying in a
pretense?
general sense. And what I mean specifically is like if telling the world that you got a not a world, but like some people you met that you got a bad GMAT score, like
If I was
doesn't matter
asked, yeah.
exactly doesn't matter to you, then I question if like that's even a conversation you should be having, right? Depending on the context of the situation. but B, I question like why even disclose that if it's not of value to you? You get what I mean?
True, but yeah, it's common conversation. Like someone's asked you a question, to me like those things are not like it's like when people omit certain things that you ask them about, then I start wondering like, oh, maybe this is
Who are
important
you?
to you. And you feel you to me like there's general like let's say hey Jourdan, did you get vaccinated? And he's like, well, I don't want to answer that, right? Now I know like that feels like you're holding that answer dearly to you because someone that didn't care like, nah, I didn't get vaccinated or yeah, I'm vaccinated, right? And more
Yeah.
likely than not, if you holding that dear, you probably didn't get vaccinated. You don't want to tell nobody. And
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
yeah. And so I mean it in that sense, where it's something like you could tell like when someone doesn't share, like that might mean something, and they're withholding that information
From you.
um,
Yeah,
from
that's
you. And
yeah. I don't disagree. It's just I think look, I want to be clear. I don't think it's super formulaic, right? It's not like you do these things and then this will happen, right?
yeah,
And so I think that's the thing that is the key part, right?
yeah. The only thing I've learned from it, um, in the context of relationship, is that if you're in a relationship and someone doesn't feel like that they're needed, it can be tough.
Yeah,
And
but
I didn't
like,
realize that, like when someone doesn't feel like there's something they can do for you, it can
right,
be tough. That's another, I didn't realize that earlier on of another, that's an avenue of vulnerability, right? Because I thought about more like the mainstream way. But I try to put myself in that shoes. Like if I was with someone, I was like, hey, let me help you do this. Let me help you do that. And they're like, not. They had it all the time. I was like, well, why am I here? Like I can't, there's nothing I can do that
well,
benefits or
so
helps.
yeah, but so I think this is important too, right? Because my wife and I navigate this, right? Like our love languages are different, right?
Hmm.
I'm a very action oriented person, right? I convey my love by doing things for
Yeah,
people,
acts of service.
right?
Yeah.
Right. My wife is like a physical touch person, right? The way she understands and perceives love is physical touch, right? And so I think like what I would question, just using your example and thinking about my marriage, is like, do I need my wife to go off and like you know put gas in the car and go to the grocery store? No, that's probably not what I need from her, right? Like that's not how I like. Even though acts are my thing, those acts don't necessarily need to be
Yeah,
things.
of
But
course.
there are other things she could do unprompted, right? Like not that
Yeah.
I didn't ask her for. I think can convey that attention and make people feel that kind of love, right? Like it took my wife and I a long time to figure out like our love languages and like navigating those differences, right? And so I think that like again, sometimes you have to be smart enough to take your own hat off and say, okay, it's not just about what I could do for this person, but like how does this person perceive and receive love, and can I do the thing? Because I think what you're trying to do is be helpful, right? Like if I use your example, right? But like being helpful to someone looks very different than how you might perceive being helpful. And this is where again I think our superpower as a couple is just communication, right? Whether we like it or we don't like it, we still tell the other person what we're thinking and what we feel. And I think doing that allows us to like avoid the well, did you understand that, or like I thought that was clear. It's like no, we say exactly what we're thinking, and before you like bite back, you say, well, wait, here's what I heard, is that right, right? Because I
Yeah.
think so much of relationships is about communication, and if you over communicate and communicate effectively, I think it could avoid some of those issues that you're talking about where people feel unneeded, unloved, unsupported, because like that cuts both ways, right? Like those are the things you could avoid with just like some real questions, right?
No, it's real, and I think to better frame it, and this is like I don't know the best word to describe it, but like it's like a little bit contradicting in a way
Yeah,
because
for sure.
I like my love language is my default is like acts of service. I'm similar. So the
Yep.
same way you talked about, I don't need you to go get like put gas in my car, but there are certain things you can do unprompted that I'm like, yo, you was really looking out.
Yep.
And my default showing it is that way, but I also recognize like everybody might not receive in the same value as if they were physical touching me, rubbing their back, or I thought about something when I was at the store and picked it up for them. So I recognize that. Where it's contradicting is that I know what I need in terms of how I like to receive love, but I tend not to let that door open in terms of vulnerability to allow people to do for me, even though I know that's what I like, how I receive love, because it's a trust thing. Like, do I trust someone to do for me that way? And I want them to show up that way, but I don't know that I've recognized that I haven't really given people opportunities to show up that way for me. And so that's been probably the biggest thing that I've learned along the line.
Yeah, and see, like, this is my key point around, like, vulnerability, right? If you're vulnerable about things that you don't care about, then, like, is that really vulnerable?
No, exactly. Yeah, exactly. No,
right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you are vulnerable about things like, oh, you know what, I need you. Like, I think one of the most important things you could say to another person is like, yo, I trust you to do this for me. And, like, not do it the way you would do it, but do it the way I would do it.
Yeah.
Right?
It takes time, right, to develop.
Exactly. But I think but the time it takes to develop is a series of baby steps and small wins that you build over time. The idea that you go from nothing to, like, yo, I'm gonna trust you to go to the Social Security office for me, right?
Yeah.
Right? Is like, you build to that, right?
Definitely.
Like, and I think you build to that with small incremental steps that are tied to you giving up some control. Right?
No, I'm hearing, and I think I see where we like miss each other a little bit, but I get it, and I think what I realize is that, in the comment that I say, like, the norms of vulnerability, I think I leverage that, even though I don't care about it. Like, some of those more common expressions of vulnerability are not me necessarily feeling like I'm being vulnerable. I think I leverage that to build trust with people and to connect with people, because, it was a guy actually in business school, one of my friends, we were talking outside, and he was like, Chidozi, like, I don't know if someone told you this, but, like, I really appreciate, like, talking to you, because I just feel like you're so present and, like, you're so engaged in the conversation. And a way people can feel that way is when you're sharing, but also asking and pulling and things like that. So I can give that without feeling like I'm being tugged on. And so someone feels connected to me. But when my disconnect is, I don't always feel connected to them as much, because I'm not, that vulnerability where I need it is not occurring. And I've recently learned, like, I also haven't created space for it to occur, because I don't want to be disappointed or what have you, all the things that come with it. And so it's like it's a balancing thing that you learn. You said, like, you have these experiences to learn certain things, but it's like it's an ongoing process of how do you create space for people to show up the way you need them to show up for you, and see how it pans out.
Yep. No, I think that's, like, I can't stress that enough, right? Like, that, like, these things only happen by lived experiences. If you don't have, if you're so reluctant to live or so reluctant to engage, you're never going to get to where you want to get to with this experience, right?
No, I tell people, especially like some women, I think guys do it in a different manner. And I think, well, let me tell you, I tell women this a lot, but that's because they ask more questions. But I think people do in general. I think it looks different. Like, guys would do it by, like, compartmentalizing, right? But I think women do it in a way where it's like, if you're only playing defense, like, no one ever wins or scores playing defense all the time.
Only defense,
and so if you're trying to protect this, trying to protect that, you're trying not to lose here, you're never taking a chance to, like, score or get what you want specifically. You're just protecting. And you can't, you play capture the flag. You can't win the flag if you're just protecting the house. At some point, you got to go try to get it. And I think we all, like, in different ways, do that, men and women, right? And if you're only doing that and not taking some of the chances that you're talking about, then you're really not going to ever get closer to having a fair shot at getting what you want.
Exactly. And I think, like, I say that that matters, because I think, again, like, you can't, this is not a science, right? If entering into a relationship was a science and it was a formula you can put in, I'm sure there's plenty of people that would do it, right? There's a Netflix show, I think, where they test your blood type or something like that, and they can tell you who you're going to spend the rest of your life with. Like, we don't have nothing like that, right? And it's something, it's fictional, but, like, we don't have anything like that, right? And so I think that, like, developing something like that is impossible, which means that, like, what worked for me may not work for you, right? And so I think that's why you have to do what's going to work for you, and not hope that it works out, but like put yourself in a position to be successful, I guess. Right?
No, totally agree. I think it goes back to some of the stuff you said. Like you got to know yourself fully before you can do that, right?
Yeah,
And and once you know yourself fully, then in some ways you can start showing humility, right? I always tell people you got to get over yourself sometimes. Like
I
no
agree.
one's that important. Where like the things that you think about, especially if you haven't done the work to show people your value, like it's still a market driven society, right? We all, for the most part, value the same things, And I was giving an example at the panel. I was like, we don't want to hear that it's market driven, but when someone walks in the room and they're over 6 foot, point for them. You know, when someone,
That's real.
point for them. Someone,
That's mad real.
someone might be,
Yeah.
yeah, someone might be 5'9". They may not get a point, right? Someone is 5'6", lost a point, And so these different attributes that we see calculate, and everybody's target number is different. Some people might be 4, acceptable for me to shoot. We all got them friends that they only need 1 point and they shooting that. Or some
That's
people may
it.
be too high, like they need 8 points or factors before they're like, I want to go do something, or I'm interested in this person. And so it's a market driven society. And so we take everything personal to the point where like, oh, I did something wrong or they didn't like me. It's like half of it's a fit. Half of it was
Yep.
like you just didn't have what they wanted. Google, a lot of people want to work for Google, but Google can't, like, everybody's not skilled to do the work that Google's hiring for. And so it's not a fit. It doesn't mean that you're not a great employee. It doesn't mean that you don't bring value. It's just that what they're looking for and what you bring to the table isn't a fit. But I think we personalize those things instead of getting over ourselves. But when you know that and you know yourself and you're like, hey, I know myself that I bring value in these ways, then you go find where you fit. And you don't sit in some stuff that you don't fit in.
And the things that you sit in that you don't fit in help shape your perspective, because like again, you have to also, to your point about get out your own way, you also have to be smart enough to know uh you also have to be smart enough to know when to shift your perspective, right?
Yeah.
So
I,
using your example, if you are typically attracted to only this kind of thing and you're giving out all these extra points, but all those points you've given out is blown up in your face, then it might be time for us to rethink that as an approach.
or is it really worth the point? Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think, to me that's a huge part of it, right? Having these lived experiences, like none of these lived experiences are worthless unless you don't take the lesson away,
No,
right?
exactly.
But I think a lot of people are not taking the lessons away. They just keep living and having lived experience, hoping for a different outcome.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it goes back to what I said about the philosophy piece. Like if you're aiming for outcomes, you can do everything you want correctly and still not get what you wanted, right?
What you want. Yep.
And we've like again, we've been in situations where I'm sure you have too. Where you probably really was cutting for someone, you liked them a lot, you showed up correctly, and they just weren't feeling you. It didn't work out.
Yep.
And then you also probably had
Happens.
situations where like you could care less about the person, and they were ready to give you everything you wanted. And
Yeah.
so the
Yeah.
outcomes
Look,
are random.
it's a it's a timing game at a certain level.
Yeah,
It's but I think, you know well, what is it? Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. It's the same
yeah,
kind of situation, right? I hate to keep using these analogies, but like in my experience, if you know who you are, you know what you're looking for, right, and you're not out here just thirstily looking, you hold out for the thing that's right for you, right?
gotcha. Nah, that's real. I mean, it's. I wish we had more time, but I'm trying to be cognizant of your time. I just want to go. We always do the round robin, so I want to do the round robin piece that we do. We won't get to go deep, but hopefully I get to bring you back with some of the other guys, and we can do like a barbershop conversation. And then I got a
Cool.
couple more questions, and we'll call it a day. But we're gonna do the quick
Yeah.
round robin piece. So these are short answers, and we do this with everybody so that, like you said, no relationship is the same, but we both logical. If you see a theme, when
Yep.
we got over 30 interviews, there's a statistical value importance to what we're
It's
seeing.
starting to
So
add up. Yeah.
yeah, and so I like to at least ask all the guys these same questions just to see what their perspective is. And so we'll start with
Sure.
you. Do you think it's necessary for your wife to be your best friend, like in general?
No, I do not think it's necessary. I think best friends are best friends, and wives are wives. I think your wife can be a type of best friend, but I don't think he or she needs to be the only one. If that makes sense.
Okay. From a love standpoint, how do you prioritize it? In this thing about in the future, would you say is wife over children or children over wife?
Wife over children, always.
Was your wedding
And
worth?
I'm gonna tell them that every day.
Oh, listen, I don't. I'm not in a position to have kids. Well, I guess I could have a kid if I wanted to, but I'm trying to wait till I get married. But I tell them like, yo, I want to make sure my kid knows I love my wife. Like, you see that woman
That's
over
it.
there? I love her a lot more than I love you, and I want them to
Yep,
like really know like
I
there's
picked her.
nothing.
I
I
didn't
picked her.
pick you.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Was your wedding worth it financially?
100%.
Ballpark. So you can give me a range, but like, how much did y'all spend on the wedding? Like, you can give me like a rough number.
We had some extenuating circumstances with ours, so over 100,000.
Y'all spent it over. I mean, it was a nice wedding. It's,
But
it's, it's a dope spot.
there was some extenuating circumstances.
You probably might be the highest so far, but it was in California too.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
if you had to pick, if you had a set number of funds, right, to allocate to either one, where would you spend more money towards a big ring or a big wedding?
Ooh,
It's always cool hearing the guy's reaction to the question.
a big ring. It lasts longer.
That's the logical part of it. What do you guys do in terms of financial practice? Joint accounts, separate accounts?
It's a hybrid. All of our investment accounts are joint. The only thing that we have that's individual is like our credit cards and checking and savings.
Does all the money come into one pot and then get allocated out, or do you guys have it separate and then you guys put it in to like joint accounts?
We have it separate and we put it in.
Got it. How close would you say you are with the in-laws?
On like a 1 to 10 scale, or
In general, like, are you fan? Are you we cordial? We cool when I see him? It's cool, or I love them a lot. Like I want them. Like we
no?
go on
Yeah,
trips together, or like
yeah.
when yeah.
No, I love my mother-in-law. She doesn't go on trips. Unfortunately, we try to convince her to, but she doesn't. But we have a very good relationship.
Okay. Do you true or false? Guys mature later than women.
True.
Okay, man. I wish we had time because I like to argue that question. Frequency of sex in terms of talk about pre-marriage and then in marriage. In terms of what is your expectation? No, sorry. Let me take a step back. Forget the pre part. In marriage, because that's what's important. What's your expectation? Like, what would you like? Like all the time, weekly, monthly, every now and then. Like, what works for you? What's good enough for you?
Weekly, I think, is important.
And what's the reality?
It varies.
Okay. What would you say? Or do you think you married up?
I think this is such a weird question. I'm not sure. Because like if I say no, did I marry down?
No, you can be
uh,
at parity.
yeah, I think
You also said
parity
she's
is
a
high.
very better human being than you. So is that how you want to
I
answer
mean,
the
well,
question?
that's what I'm saying. But like, but then if I accept that, then I'm saying she married down,
Well, I
right?
mean,
So
yeah, that pretense is there if you could be at past a certain level where like we both are winning. She's
yeah.
just higher than
No,
you.
I mean, I think, yeah, I would say I married up, but I'm challenged by the question. So yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
that's what we try to do sometimes.
Yeah.
Are you a destination or a journey person?
That's a good question. This is actually an active question I'm processing as we speak, so it's a good one. I do think I am more of a journey person.
What about your wife?
Uh, she is also a journey person.
That's probably one of the biggest. Like you say like you've been married and you had to adjust on delivery.
Yep.
At least in my life experience so far, I've learned I have to adjust on like recognizing the value in the journey because I'm
Yep.
I'm very much a destination person. And so that's probably one of my growth areas of like realizing there are valuable parts of like being very focused on how we get to where we're trying to go versus did
Yeah.
we accomplish it?
So I think this is something I could talk about for a long time. So I don't want to belabor that because I do need to go. But it's interesting because where I'm questioning is like, does the destination actually feel that great, right? Because like we've all had major accomplishments in our lives, right? Um, like I find people like us generally set a destination, hit the destination, and they set another one.
Yeah.
But like they don't even savor the destination when they've arrived. So that's why it's like an open question for me. But I get what you're saying. Sorry,
No,
keep going.
no, that's
I
a good
could
point
talk
too.
about that for a long time. It's like
Who
an
runs
active question I'm processing.
no, who runs the show? You or her?
We both do. It's actually a good question. We talk about this frequently. I'm not sure. Um, we have very different personalities, right? I think I'm much more just like calm and chill. So I think yeah, if you just looked on the outside, it would look like she was in charge, if you want to call it that. But I think we co steer this ship. I would say. Um, I'm pretty chill about like 7 out of 10 things, but there are 3 things that there's like no give for me on, and she does
Yeah.
not touch those 3 things. So like, if I think it's an equals situation, but I think perception for most people is probably that she runs the show.
Got it. What's your wife's greatest attribute?
She has a very kind heart.
Okay.
It
And
gets her in a
then
lot of trouble, but I also think it's her greatest attribute.
what's more important to you, to be respected or to be loved?
It's weird because in the context of my marriage, it's obviously to be loved, but I would say I'm not sure you can love someone you don't respect. So loved.
Okay. So one topic that I wanted to hit with you that I thought was important to get to, and then we can wrap it up with my closing question. I know like you mentioned you're pretty much career driven, and that matters to you, and you've had very demanding careers in your experience, as well as like now as an entrepreneur, um, you being focused on that too. She's very much like career driven, and that's a very important aspect of her life. How do you navigate that balance between not only showing up for your person in the ways they need you to show up, but doing that while you're doing what you need to do, and also making time for your relationship? Because usually you
Yeah,
see one or the other. It's not like both sometimes.
yeah. Well, look, I would say there's always trade-offs, right? I think the way we've navigated it is just like, you know, trying to make the right trade-offs at the right time, right? We were in a situation where we were thinking about moving, and we decided on a Sunday night to move, and then on Monday, she had an opportunity that she could not pass up on come up, and we completely threw out our plans to move based on that opportunity, right? And I have zero regrets about that decision, right? I think because we both have professional ambition, we understand when our relationship needs to take a backseat for work and when our work needs to take a backseat for our relationship. I think this is something she is admittedly better about, but I would also say that she is also very transparent about what her needs and expectations are, and as a result, we find a happy medium that works for us both, right? But it is challenging. But I think again, because both of us are so career oriented, we understand in a way like maybe it will be harder if one of us was and one of us wasn't, right?
That's real. So my wrap up question is: why did you get married?
I got married because I didn't think that I would want to spend the rest of my life with anyone else, right? I think when you find someone that you care very deeply for and you see the value of marriage and this relationship for your life, um, I think is the best, again, being rational and logical, is the best investment I've ever made, right?
Yeah.
This person makes me better. They push me. They motivate me. You can't put a price tag on that. And even when I'm at my angriest with her for one reason or another, I still feel very lucky to be with her and to have her, to call her my wife, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, it was a no-brainer. Right? I didn't think I don't. No, I don't think, but I know I'm not going to find that anywhere else. Right? I've told her multiple times I don't think I would get married again. Right? If we don't work, that's it. It's a wrap.
Well, that's gonna be my other question in terms of reading between the lines. Is it safe to assume that like marriage was like it could happen, it could not happen prior to you like meeting her?
It's funny, like I don't think I was actually talking to my best friend about this yesterday. I don't know that I had a full sense for what my life as an adult would look like, right? We didn't really talk about growing up on the East Coast, but like I'm not sure that I really had a perception of what like my 20s and 30s would look like when I was growing up. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, it's hard to conceptualize. Like what I will say is it's hard to conceptualize my life after meeting her not being what it is today.
Got it.
I believe squarely in this. Like there are certain decision points in your life where like you know you made the right decision because there's not even an alternative that you could ponder, right?
That's real. That sounds like somebody's engagement. A lot.
I honestly, like, I mean this genuinely. I can't imagine what my life would be like if we didn't meet in business school, right? Like, I don't know where I would be living. I don't know what kind of experiences I would have had. I don't know where I would be working, right? Because it's just impossible, like, for me to conceptualize, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
think about Parthenon. I made it to final round interviews at Parthenon and as an intern and didn't get an offer. And it was my girlfriend, now wife, who told me to reapply, right? Um, it was my wife who, when I ignored the phone call of my current employer, told me I was being crazy and at least hear out what they had to say. It was my wife who told me to start the company that I started, right? I can't conceptualize what I would have if not for her influence in a lot of ways. And so I think this is the life I was meant to have, right?
No, that's real.
I could
Man,
point to many instances in my past relationships where I was just like, yeah, this needs to. I can see how my life would be very different,
I can see some
right?
other ways I could do this.
Yeah, I have a real hard time seeing that, right?
It
And
leads
so I
me
think
to
for me,
it leads me to ask like I think that's one of the things that at least men think about is like I think guys are looking for that view. I mean, you may not you didn't know like she was going to be helpful in these decision points, but I definitely think when you are especially maybe you saw this in her early or you were willing to take the chance, but I think a lot of guys tend to find someone and at least of what they know of, they get to a point where like I don't really either. I don't want to know. I don't care because I see enough here. I don't really care what the rest of the alternatives look like. But when you're with someone and they're cool, but you see cool in the Jane and Sally, you're like, well, is this cool? The best cool I can get, you know? And I think that makes it tough, versus you got something like, you know what? I've seen like we've all dated enough to know like I got a good. I always say like my argument for the maturity piece of it. I ask the question in terms of relationship because that's typically how it gets. Like guys play games and all these things, and I'm like, well, it's really like when it comes to like relationships and dating, like it's not about like oh guys realize these things later. It's like poker. Like some guys are just good at it from jump, and then you see some young guys get married early. Some guys been playing poker for years and years and years and still terrible. And then some people have to lose out on a good hand for them to realize, I know what a good hand looks like. If I get this hand again or something similar, it's a wrap because I, you might not have known that at first. You learn and then you adjust. And I think that's how we look at it when we get to that point where you're like, you know what? I see this person here and I don't want anything else or I don't want to lose that. Then we're like, you know what? It's not worth anything else.
no. And look, I put myself squarely in that position, right? I think the only thing I'll push back on is the idea that that has to be perfect, right?
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. No
It
such
has
thing
to
as
check
perfect.
every single box in all the boxes you didn't even think were boxes, right?
Exactly.
It is again, I attribute it 100% to a self awareness thing, right? If
Yeah.
you're self aware and you have a clear sense of what you want, when you get what you need, then
You're
that's
good.
it. Wrap it
Yeah.
up.
You're satisfied. You're full. What does it mean to you to be a man in your relationship?
Um, to like to provide, I'd say. And I don't mean provided like in the traditional sense, like, food on the table kind of situation, but like just to be like the like stability for my family, right? And when I say family, as far as I'm concerned, we're a family. This idea because we don't have kids, we're not a family.
Yeah, no, I feel you.
So I think for me is to provide for my family and take care of my partner, right? Like that could be trivial, like my wife doesn't pump gas, right? Right. And it's not because she doesn't want to pump gas, it's because like it's important to me that she not have to worry about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. My dad's like that.
The gas tank is always full because like I feel like that's my responsibility, right? I always make sure that we have the things we need as a family or the things that we want. And I think again, where I think it's important to have a partner is she takes care of me in the same way, right? So it's not one sided. It's not like I'm always just out here, right?
Yeah.
Over time, figured out the things that I need that even maybe I don't have the acute awareness that I need, and she just
That's
does.
the real like you got someone good is when
Yep.
they showing up in ways for you. They're like you like when it happens you're like yes, but like in the moment you don't do it for yourself because
No.
you're in it. So that's what's up.
I am terrible. I am terrible to myself.
Yeah.
I don't take the proper care of myself at all, and so I think to not to verbalize that, and like we laugh about it because like look, I said relationships are complicated, right? Right, like though she does things for me that like I joke with her that I could have did that myself, but she was like, but you weren't going to, right?
Yeah.
And so I think like you need somebody who does that for you meaningfully and comfortably and without the expectation that like you owe them something.
Yeah, genuinely. Yeah, no, that's a real one.
She's such a caring, like good human. And while again it sometimes gets her in difficult situations, it's also what I value most about her.
Got it. Last two questions. If you were to have a son, let's say 20 years from now, 25 years from now, what advice would you give him about dating?
Uh, be patient and be honest about what you want.
Okay.
That's it.
And
It's that
then
simple.
if you have a daughter, what advice would you give her 20, 25
Same
years
advice. Same advice. Be
from now?
patient.
No nuance at all.
Nah, there's no nuance, right? I'll trust that I'll raise my kids in a way to understand what that means for them and that they'll protect themselves. So the only advice is be patient because the process takes time, and be honest about what you want, right? Look, there are going to be people who look you dead in your face and lie to you, but like you will know them when you see them, right? You like you got to deal with enough navigating the other humans in the world. You can't overcomplicate it for yourself by overthinking it or hanging and stressing on every word, right? If I raise a daughter or a son, I want them to be confident in themselves. I want them to know who they are, right? I want them to trust that they are a good person and bring value to a relationship. Be patient to see the value in other people and be honest about what they expect.
Cool. Well, we're gonna leave it on that note. Man, I really appreciate it. This has been great. I learned some things about myself. I hope the listeners learned some things that will help them, or they could, at the least, make you, challenge your own personal thought. Hopefully, it wasn't too triggering for you. But Jourdan, I want to thank you for your time. It's always good chatting with you, so we need to do it more often. But I appreciate you
for sure.
For being willing to do it and then doing it. Like it wasn't no reminder or whatever. You're like, just let me know when, and we did it. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Thanks for having me. Hopefully, my story is helpful to others. And again, appreciate you inviting me to come on. Looking forward to hearing what people have to say.
Amen. Appreciate it.
We're already way past time, so I'll keep it short. Tune in next week. We'll have a new guy on the next episode. And until then, you know what it is. I hope the conversation keeps going.